Well, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. The day we celebrate white supremacy, turkey, slavery, stuffing, and the slaughter of Native American tribes. I'm kidding, of course. Just kidding, folks. Because the truth is, we never really had a first Thanksgiving. I have an article here for you at history.com. This is by Christopher Klein, came out in 2015, then it was republished in 2019. But you also have claims that the first Thanksgiving took place in Florida. Some say it took place in Texas. So everybody's getting on the game here. And as you're going to find out, there was actually more conflicts between these groups in Europe, the French and the Spanish, for example, and they talk about that here, than Europeans and Native American tribes. So this is an article that came out in 2015. It was republished in 2019 by Christopher Klein. It says here, did Florida host the first Thanksgiving? More than 50 years before the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, Spanish colonists in Florida feasted with Native Americans on what some call the first Thanksgiving. Blaring trumpets and thundering artillery serenaded Don Pedro Menendez de Avilés as he waded ashore on September 8, 1565. The Spanish admiral kissed a cross held aloft by the fleet's captain, Father Francisco Lopez, then claimed Florida for both his god and his country. As curious members of the indigenous Temecula tribe looked on, the 800 newly arrived colonists gathered around a makeshift altar as Father Lopez celebrated a Catholic Mass of Thanksgiving for their safe arrival in the newly christened settlement of St. Augustine. So if the Spanish did have this first Thanksgiving, it would have been more of a Thanksgiving Mass because they were Catholic, with some type of meal or feast attached to it. At the invitation of Menendez, the Temeculans then joined the newcomers in a communal meal. Some Florida historians have argued that this feast, and not the one held 56 years later by the Pilgrims and Wampanoags in Plymouth, Massachusetts, was actually North America's first Thanksgiving. Quote, it was the first community act of religion and Thanksgiving and the first permanent settlement in the land, wrote University of Florida professor emeritus of history Michael Gannon in his book, The Cross in the Sand. And I know what they would have had because I'm from Florida originally. But it says here, the menu for the meal shared by the Spaniards and Temeculans lacked most of today's typical Thanksgiving dishes, but it did feature a traditional post-Thanksgiving staple, leftovers. Unlike the Pilgrims, who served food freshly harvested from American soil, the Spanish were forced to make do with whatever provisions they had taken with them on the long journey, or whatever survived the journey, because a lot of times you had food spoilage on these long journeys. According to Robin Goya, author of the children's book America's Real First Thanksgiving, the European colonists likely ate hard biscuits and coquito, a rich garbanzo stew made with pork, garlic, saffron, cabbage, and onion, washed down with red wine. Quote, the Temecula ate what was available to them locally, and that could have included alligator, bear, wild turkey, venison, tortoise, and food from the sea such as turtle, shark, mullet, or sea cactus. Archaeological research also shows the indigenous people ate large amounts of oysters and clams along with beans and squash. And if you're from the South, from Florida, this is a staple in your diet. You eat a lot of fish, you might eat oysters, clams, a lot of seafood. Some historians argue that while America's first Thanksgiving indeed took place in Florida, it actually occurred 40 miles further north 1 year earlier than the one in St. Augustine. And listen up, SDWs. Listen to this. And this will disprove this notion that the first Thanksgiving was about white supremacy or slavery. Just taking out all these Native American tribes. So if in fact we had this first Thanksgiving happening 40 miles further north 1 year earlier in what is now Jacksonville, it would have happened with the French Huguenots, who were Calvinists like the Pilgrims, who held a service of Thanksgiving and feasted with the Temeculans to celebrate the June 1564 establishment of Fort Caroline. Fort Caroline's along the St. Johns River in what is present-day Jacksonville. Quote, we sang a psalm of thanksgiving unto God, beseeching him that it would please his grace to continue his accustomed goodness towards us, French explorer René Guillaume de Laudonnière wrote in his journal. But unfortunately, divine blessings were fleeting for the French colonists because less than 2 weeks after landing in the New World, Menendez led an attack on Fort Caroline that resulted in the slaying of 130 French Huguenots. Is that SJWs? So the Spanish attacked the French. Well, wait a minute. I thought that it was these evil white Europeans that came over and slaughtered all the Native Americans. Well, a little known fact about conquistadors. A lot of Africans became conquistadors. And because of the Moor invasion, you would have had a lot of conquistadors that would have had darker skin, darker complexion. And the French Huguenots were viewed by the Spanish as heretics and interlopers. Weeks later, Spanish colonists massacred an additional 200 French shipwreck survivors at an inlet near St. Augustine, and that was eventually dubbed matadas, the Spanish word for slaughters. So this bloodshed wiped away any historical memory of the quote-unquote first Thanksgiving held by both the French and the Spanish in the 1560s until their discovery in recent decades. But Florida isn't the only state that began in the 20th century to stake a claim on America's first Thanksgiving. There's a historical marker erected by the Texas Society of the Daughters of the American Colonists outside Canyon, Texas. I believe that's in the, trying to remember the town, but it's the desert there in Texas. One of the deserts in Texas, pardon me. Why can't I remember the name of the town? El Paso. El Paso Desert. There you go. Sorry, I had a brain fart there. So Texas states that Father Juan de Padilla conducted a Thanksgiving service there in May 1541 for an army of 1,500 accompanied Spanish conquistador Francisco Vasquez de Coronado's men. Coronado's men. Virginia and Maine have also put themselves forward as host of the nation's first Thanksgiving in the years before the arrival of the Mayflower. So again, we've got everybody claiming that they had the first Thanksgiving. James W. Baker, author of Thanksgiving, the biography of an American holiday, notes that it was traditional for European explorers such as Ponce de Leon upon his 1513 arrival in Florida to give formal thanks for a safe transatlantic crossing, but these isolated pre-pilgrim ceremonies bear little connection to the future American holiday. Quote, while any of these can be said to be Thanksgiving or Thanksgivings, actually celebrated before 1620 and the Pilgrims, none were repeated or resulted in spawning a new tradition. As just isolated and ephemeral events, they do not bear any real historical significance beyond their position in time, Baker says. None of these events were made anything of historically or even rediscovered as being historically significant until the 20th century. But it wasn't until, and it goes on to say here, it wasn't until 1841 that people started to solidify this idea of a Thanksgiving. And actually, the Thanksgiving in Plymouth would have taken place for about 3 days. 3-day event. It was actually a harvest celebration. So it could have either been a Catholic Thanksgiving Mass, some type of harvest celebration that may have lasted for a couple of days, in this case 2 or 3 days. But it really wasn't until 1841 that this came into focus. Quote, while we can argue the case for Florida, Texas, or any other claimant as a true first occurrence of a holiday of that name, it is ultimately a moot point, as all of them lack any historical agency in the evolution of the modern holiday. So go check out this article at History.com. Thought I'd share this with you about the first Thanksgiving. Truth is, we never really had a first Thanksgiving. Everybody was celebrating their quote-unquote Thanksgiving at different times of the year. May have been a Thanksgiving Catholic Mass. It may have been some type of harvest celebration. But it really wasn't this holiday that we've romanticized, that we have this mythology around. So I thought you'd find this interesting and try to shatter the myth as we preserve great art, history, culture here on the channel. That we shatter this myth that a holiday like Thanksgiving was based solely in white supremacy, slavery, and this idea that we just want to come into America and slaughter all these Native American tribes and take over. When the truth is that the number one cause of death amongst Native Americans, and I mentioned this before, was actually starvation. The three top causes of death for Native American tribes was starvation, hypothermia, and diseases such as cholera. Because remember, people drank out of the same river that they bathed in or washed their clothes in. You didn't have the same sanitation that we have today or plumbing. So life was really rough then. A lot of diseases they didn't know about. But I thought I'd share this with you again. It's at History.com, story by Christopher Klein, came out in 2015, republished 2019. Did Florida host the first Thanksgiving? If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. You can also follow me at Instagram, hashtag Jason Composes, or find me at Twitter, Cultural Confederacy at Twitter. This is the Cultural Confederacy saying peace out. Stay safe, everybody. God bless this thing we call the United States. You all have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll catch you next time.